Today we're going to talk about common knowledge, not the a little club soda will get that stain out kind, but awareness of someone else's awareness of something. As in, I see that you have a stop sign, and I know that you see that stop sign, and I know that I know there's a stop sign right there, so I can drive through this intersection trusting that we will not crash. That kind of common knowledge. From KERA in Dallas, this is Think. I'm Krys Boyd. I realize it doesn't exactly feel like we've worked out the relativity of space and time here, but once you start paying attention to the role common knowledge plays in virtually every human interaction, you realize that without this amazing ability, society as we know it could not exist. Steven Pinker has been paying attention. He's devoted much of his career to thinking through how we think. He's the Johnstone Professor of Psychology at Harvard, and his newest book is called When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows: Common Knowledge and the Mysteries of Money, Power, and Everyday Life. Steven, welcome back to Think.
Thank you.
How does the story of the Emperor's New Clothes illustrate how common knowledge works?
When the little boy said the emperor was naked, he wasn't telling them anything they didn't already know. But he changed the state of their knowledge nonetheless, because after he blurted it out with an earshot of everyone else, now everyone knew that everyone else knew that everyone else knew that the emperor was naked. And that's a different state of knowledge than just knowing it, knowing that everyone else knows it. Now, and of course, the crucial punchline of the story is that changed their relationship with the emperor, from obsequious deference to ridicule and scorn. And so the morals of the story of that story, at least as the way that I interpret it, is first of all that there is a big difference between everyone knowing something and everyone knowing that everyone knows it. Second, that mind-bending state needn't actually consist in anyone's consciousness of I think that he thinks that I think that he thinks that I think that he thinks, because you can start to get dizzy after a few rounds of that. And technically, in the logician's understanding of common knowledge, actually has to be an infinite number of I know that he knows that I know that he knows, which is, of course, can't fit inside a finite head. So the second moral of the story is that a conspicuous, self-evident event, something that happens when you see everyone else seeing it happen, can generate common knowledge in a stroke. You don't have to actually go through the thoughts of I know that she knows. You just know it instantly by the fact that it is public, conspicuous out there. And the third moral is that common knowledge matters to our social relationships. In this case, the deference and respect that the emperor had previously commanded, shattered by the common knowledge of his indignity.
That has big ramifications that we will be talking about later in this conversation.
Yes, more generally, in the academic literature on common knowledge, the mathematicians, the logicians, the philosophers, the economists, the understanding is that common knowledge is necessary for coordination, for people being on the same page, acting together in a way that benefits everyone. You can't do it if you're the only one doing it, or if you don't know that everyone else knows that that's the way to do it. A very simple example is driving on the right as opposed to driving on the left. There's no reason to drive on one side over the other, but there's every reason to drive on the same side that everyone else is driving, and everyone has to know that. But what I argue in the book, which is a novel contribution, is that our social relationships like deference and respect, friendship, communal warmth, love, a sexual relationship, a transactional relationship where you're simply exchanging things, all of these are cemented by common knowledge too. They all involve coordination. What makes two people friends? Well, each one knows that the other one knows that the first one knows that they're friends. It's not as if they sign a contract, but that's the way our social relationships work, as well as our formal relationships, like traffic laws, like using paper currency, like respecting who's the boss or the president or the king, and so on.
So how is common knowledge different from what's called private knowledge, which can be termed private even when it is widely shared among people?
Yes, well, let's go back to the emperor's new clothes. When the emperor paraded around, there was universal private knowledge. everyone knew that the emperor was naked privately. They couldn't be sure that everyone else knew that because, of course, the story had gone around that only fools could fail to see the emperor's new clothes. And so no one wanting to admit they were a fool still had to harbor, at least within the suspension of disbelief in the story, had to harbor some doubt as to whether they were the only one. But that was exploded when there was the public signal of the little boy blurting it out.
So I've been in conferences where I've been a little bit bored by whatever's taking place on the dais and assumed that I was the only one because we're all sort of leaning forward and performing our attention. That's private knowledge, even if we all sort of share the same observation.
Yes, and sometimes there can be a combination of private knowledge and public misconception,
Mm.
sometimes called a spiral of silence or pluralistic ignorance, where everyone mistakenly thinks that everyone else believes something and no one actually believes it. I think the first study of it was done in a fraternity where it turned out that none of the frat bros actually thought it was cool to drink until you pass out, but each one felt they had to do it because they mistakenly thought all the others thought it was cool. Um, and there are many other examples in Saudi Arabia. It turned out that none of the men actually thought that women should be kept in the home and forbidden to work or drive, but none of them would allow their wives to work or drive because they mistakenly thought that all the other men thought that all the other men thought it was unacceptable.
Wow. You mentioned cooperation and the fact that common knowledge is really important for this, or rather coordination. I wanted to ask you if we need to make a distinction here between cooperation and coordination when we consider the role of common knowledge.
Well, I make the distinction. It's not a technical one. It's not common knowledge, you might say. But cooperation, as it's been discussed in biology, in sociology, in books like The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, referred to the case in which someone or several people pay a cost in order to benefit someone else. So animals that take turns grooming each other or feeding each other, people who trade favors, raising the question of how can you be sure that you'll be paid back? And if you aren't, why are people nice to each other? Why do they give blood, give to charity, and so on? And it's a fascinating problem. But it's not the only problem of people working together, because sometimes people work together and for everyone's benefit, and no one pays a cost. In the animal kingdom, we sometimes call it mutualism. So when an oxpecker bird picks ticks off the back of a zebra, um, it's not it's not as if the oxpecker is doing the zebra a favor and expects to be repaid. It's for the oxpecker's own good. It gets a meal with the ticks. The zebra gets something out of it. It's tormented by fewer pests, and as we say, everybody wins except the ticks. But so that's a case of coordination or mutualism in the animal kingdom. Namely, you deliver a benefit to another organism at the same time as you are enjoying a benefit yourself. So it's an everyone wins type of situation, where it doesn't raise the puzzle of why would anyone bother? Why isn't everyone selfish? But it is a question of coordination of information, being on the same page, avoiding clashes, avoiding too many cooks, avoiding things falling through the cracks. Each one has to know that the other one knows that they know that the other one knows in order for them to be on the same page and act together.
If we didn't have this somewhat miraculous ability to instantaneously work out what is common knowledge in many situations, we could just establish this using language, right? Do you see that stop sign? I see that stop sign. That's less efficient in a lot of situations. Is that the problem?
Well, I think language, the reason that our species has language is in large part, to generate common knowledge, so that we can coordinate. Um, you you guys fan out on the east, we'll fan out on the west. We will trap the animals at the edge of a cliff where we can easily dispatch them. You can't do that if each one is marching to the beat of his own drummer. And It's even hard to do with with gestures, but with language, you know that the other person has understood what you said, and they know it, and it allows you to act together. So language can generate common knowledge. It's not the only thing. There's also eye contact. There's also laughter. There's also blushing. There's also tears. Uh, but it is a way of generating many, many different kinds of common knowledge very, very effectively. So I think it's not a coincidence that we are the species that has language. We're also the species that does big, impressive things. We build things. And perhaps the story of the Tower of Babel is a story about the common knowledge generating power of language, that as long as everyone spoke the same language, they could build a tower that would reach up to the heavens and threaten God himself. Once they lost that ability to coordinate by the each speaking a different language, they lost the ability to coordinate.
We're learning more and more as time goes by about at least rudimentary capacity for something like language in other species. But as far as we know, how common is it for social animals to verify and demonstrate common knowledge?
There are certain hardwired ways in which they can do it, where there's some public signal that they can all perceive at the same time that can get them all on the same page. So I give the example of what marine biologists call the Great Barrier Reef Annual Sex Fest, which is less racy than it sounds because it doesn't pertain to people; it pertains to coral. Now, coral have this problem. They're stuck to the ocean floor. They can't get around, and so how do they mate? The answer is they spew eggs and sperm into the water as if hoping that they will meet their counterparts spewed up by some other coral, but they can't spew their gametes 24/7. That would be expensive, exhausting. Ideally, they would all agree on what day of the month, what day of the year to spread their gametes, and they do. They coordinate on the full moon. They a fixed number of days after the full moon, they all spew simultaneously. Um, and in a sense, in a kind of metaphorical sense, they have common knowledge that 5 days, say, after the full moon is the day to do it. Now, they don't literally have knowledge because they don't even have brains to have knowledge with, uh, but they have the implicit equivalent. Now, what makes humans different is that we do actually think about what other people think about what we think about what they think. And so we're much more flexible. It's not just a question of having sex 5 days after the full moon, but there's just no limit to the number of ways in which we can coordinate. We can use pieces of paper as sources of value, namely currency. We can all respect the same leader, chairman or president or king. We can drive on the right or drive on the left. We can stay home on Sunday. All of these things where there's no particular reason to do it that way other than that everyone else is doing it that way, which is reason enough as long as everyone knows that everyone knows it.
And even the most fractious and disagreeable among us engages in a lot of common knowledge activity every day.
Yes, whenever we use direct language, whenever we make eye contact, uh, whenever we uh, use some understanding to show up at a particular time, whether it be for a rendezvous or showing up for work, whenever we recognize people as, say, committed versus available. That's why we have weddings. It's a common knowledge generator. When you're at a wedding, that's the moment. Everyone knows that's the moment. You see other people witnessing the event and witnessing you witnessing it. Many of our ceremonies, our rituals, our symbols are arbitrary but not kind of random. They are arbitrary, but they have a logic to them in that everyone recognizing the same arbitrary point allows you to coordinate. Why does the week have 7 days? There's nothing about seven that corresponds to any astronomical event or any natural cycle. But once 7 days got locked in with the Babylonians, you have to have some sort of cycle. As long as everyone agrees that it's seven, it works for everyone.
Stephen, you've referred to currency a couple of minutes ago. You write in the book that common knowledge can create non-physical realities. So how did common knowledge free us all from having to walk around if we wanted to go to the market with pockets full of silver and gold?
Yes, right, or bartering chickens for wool or
Pockets
milk.
full of chickens, right?
So what makes it is a fact that a dollar is carries value. But where is that fact? I think some people might think, well, don't they have like a bunch of gold in Fort Knox? But we're not on the gold standard anymore. The reason that money is indeed valuable is that everyone knows that it's valuable, but more important, everyone knows that everyone knows. So I can give up something of value for a green piece of paper because I know that other people will accept it because they know that still other people will accept it. Conversely, if that common knowledge evaporates, if people no longer trust in the currency, then you can very quickly get hyperinflation and the currency can become worthless. Realities like institutions, corporations, governments, universities, nonprofits, entities like days of the week, exist. Even though they're not made of stuff. There's no such. You can't go looking to find where Tuesday is, but Tuesday is real because everyone knows what Tuesday is, and everyone knows that everyone knows. So common knowledge can generate social realities, which can govern our lives, and they can, especially when it comes to things like authority, who has power. And you might think, oh, well, the people with guns. But it's not exactly right because no regime has enough firepower to intimidate every last member of the population. If everyone decided to storm the palace at once, no government on earth could stop them. Or if they all decided to stop working on the same day until the government left. That's why you often have regime changes when there is a public demonstration where everyone shows up and everyone sees everyone else showing up. That can give you the safety in numbers as long as there is coordination, which you can only have through common knowledge. In this case, people who might privately have been discontent with the regime, each one fearing either they might be the only one or even suspecting that other people were discontented. They may not know that the others knew that others were like them. That can change if you've got either a public media, like the printing press. That's why dictatorships don't have freedom of the press, or a public turnout in a public place where everyone can see everyone else, and that's why dictatorships don't have freedom of assembly.
The story of the emperor's new clothes demonstrates that common knowledge isn't necessarily always accurate or true fact. How do our affiliations and relationships shape our perception of common knowledge? Just take the two main political parties in this country. They seem to be looking at very different realities, but within those parties, those realities are agreed upon.
Yeah, so common knowledge is often generated by salient public signals, things that everyone can see while seeing that everyone else sees them. And it's possible we had less polarization in the past because we had more nationwide media. Everyone watching Walter Cronkite on the CBS News, or everyone even listening to Johnny Carson or reading USA Today, or listening to watching CNN. With the rise of cable news networks like Fox News, which appeal to an audience of a subculture where everyone gets their information from the same source, which might be completely walled off from other sources of information. Social media, it has been shown that people tweet and retweet or post and repost or link and relink within interconnected networks that may have very few links to other interconnected networks. They're connected within themselves, but there are not very many bridges from one to the other. And that can lead to separate pools of common knowledge, more accurately, common belief, because technically something has to be true for it to be knowledge. And so if different communities believe different things, they can't both be right. So you might call it common belief, but it's the same kind of phenomenon.
How does common knowledge play into the modern day phenomenon of cancel culture?
Well, in cancel culture, where you can get a mob falling over each other to denounce some sinner, some miscreant, I think it's a case where norms are propped up by common knowledge. That is, what uh, norms like, which can change, like you don't tell ethnic jokes in public anymore. You pick up after your dog. You don't smoke indoors. Uh, they exist because everyone knows they exist, and therefore, if someone flouts them in a public manner where you fear that everyone sees them flouting it, then the norm itself can unravel unless the norm breaker is publicly punished. And again, it has to be public. Now, in the old days, punishments were public. You had public hangings, you had pillories and stocks in the town square, you had burnings at the stake, crucifixions, and so on. Now we do it through the media. But the general dynamic that to hold up a norm, the norm breaker has to be publicly punished is something that we see, I think, playing out in shaming mobs and cancel culture, where someone who is thought to break a norm, they make a remark that other people interpret as racist or as condoning violence against their side. The people feel the urge to rise up and punish them publicly. Or better still, silence them, deplatform them, as we say. An interesting metaphor because a platform generates common knowledge. Someone on a platform can be seen by a crowd, each of whom sees the other. And so to prevent the dangerous idea or the flouting of the norm from becoming common knowledge, you take them off the platform.
Any sense of why some people seem very motivated to sort of perform this excoriation of people who have broken norms, and other people may silently disagree but not feel the need to, say, pile on X or some other platform?
Well, there are some of it is individual differences, and just in terms of how sadistic people are, and it has been shown that the social media mobbers often tend to be, by independent measures, people who take enjoyment in other people's pain, sadists. Um, there's also, though, the a general problem is when something has to be done for the public good, and whoever does it takes some risk at paying a price. Who's going to volunteer? There's the old story of who will bell the cat, where the mice will all be better off if someone puts a bell around the cat while it's sleeping, so that when the cat approaches, the ringing of the bell alerts the mice. But of course, whichever mouse tries to put the bell around the cat's neck has some chance of being eaten if the cat awakens. So the who will bell the cat problem, sometimes called the volunteer's dilemma, uh, sometimes is solved by showering praise, kudos, rewards on the person who publicly makes the sacrifice on behalf of the group. And indeed, uh, people who publicly punish are sometimes rewarded in esteem and opportunities for cooperation by the rest of the community.
Why are we so good at noticing the hypocrisies and the inaccuracies of people outside our own group, assuming that those people don't have any logic, they don't apply reason to their values, and therefore, at the same time, rather so blind to the ways that our own group may have similar flaws in our thinking?
Yes, and I think isn't there a biblical passage that you uh, note the mote in someone else's eye while ignoring the plank in your own?
Right.
Um, yeah, so it is a widespread human bias, sometimes called the my side bias, to assume that you yourself and your own coalition, your tribe, your political party, your religion, are wise, knowledgeable, rational, noble, and the other side is ignorant, stupid, selfish, evil. Now, not everyone can be right, and the polarization is largely a phenomenon of negative polarization. It's the my side bias going out of control. The one of the reasons that exchange, bringing people together, diversity of viewpoints, free speech is essential, is that it is one way to push back against the my side bias. If someone can say something and someone else has the freedom to say what's wrong with it, then there's at least some chance of breaking out of your bubble of misconceptions.
So this is why authoritarian leaders really don't care for free speech.
They don't care for it, indeed. It is something to think about. You might think, well, why doesn't an autocrat just let the people bitch and moan all they want? I mean, he's got the guns. But the reason is that when people with free speech, and freedom of the press, even more so, there is the means to generate common knowledge that people can coordinate on their opposition to the regime. If they act together, they can sometimes bring about regime change in a way that if they acted at separate times, the regime could pick each one of them off individually. So I recount the joke from the Soviet Union, of course, a totalitarian state, of a man distributing leaflets in Red Square. And of course, the KGB immediately arrest him, bring him back to police headquarters, only to discover that he's been handing out blank sheets of paper. They confront him. They say, "What's the meaning of this?" And he says, "What's there to say? It's so obvious." So that's a joke about common knowledge. He wasn't conveying any particular content, but as with the little boy in the story The Emperor's New Clothes, he was changing people's state of knowledge, namely everyone who saw him and accepted the piece of paper and saw other people accepting the paper knew that the source of disgruntlement, the grievance, was common knowledge, and that could allow people to coordinate their opposition, which is far more effective than opposing the regime individually. And
What's
the
so
reason
oh, please continue. Sorry.
the reason it works, to take another allusion from popular culture, in the movie Gandhi, the Gandhi character at one point says to a British colonial officer, "In the end, you will leave, because there is no way that 100,000 Englishmen can control 350 million Indians if the Indians refuse to cooperate." He might have said, unable to coordinate.
I think what's so interesting about the, anecdotes about an autocrat not wanting people to speak freely about their discontent is that presumably those autocrats are aware that people may not love every policy. Some of them, they have the ability to sort of suss out common knowledge as well as anybody else. They're okay with people thinking it as long as they don't dare say it.
Yes, and as long as they don't say it within earshot of everyone else.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
they and I cite a study done by my colleague at Harvard, Gary King, on censorship in China, where they got a trove of millions of social media posts, and also were able to figure out which ones were being censored. And it turns out that complaining about a government official is not necessarily censored. In fact, the Chinese government kind of values that as a source of information about which government officials aren't doing their jobs, kind of mollifying the masses. But anything that hints at coordination, a meetup, a new bulletin board, a new social media group where someone might share their discontent in a way that other people can find out about it, or where people can form some group, some organization, Chinese government comes down on that like a ton of bricks. It's the coordination that they are afraid of.
You note in the book that we don't come into the world with the ability to figure out what is common knowledge. This ability develops around age 7 or 8. So is this something we learn or something that is a product of our brain development at a particular time?
Well, what happens at 7 or 8 is the ability to think about thoughts. That starting around 3 or 4, kids can appreciate that other people have beliefs and desires. But the idea that they might have beliefs and desires about other people's beliefs and desires comes a bit later. And in general, the more layers of thinking about other people, thinking about your thinking, about their thinking, about your thinking, and so on, it is mentally strenuous for the best of us, the most mature of us, and it matures through life, and it varies among people. People with more social skills, more savoir-faire, more social insight, less likely, not along the spectrum, as we now say, have more of an ability to think about thoughts. But the just the ability to leap to the state of common knowledge, sometimes we can leapfrog all of the I think that she thinks, if there is a conspicuous public signal. And kids, earlier on are do have common knowledge of some conspicuous events, like as in joint attention. If you're looking at something that your parent is looking at, and each of you can see the other looking at it, that is a kind of common knowledge. It's necessary for kids to learn words, because words only work because they're common knowledge. What makes the word rose refer to a rose? Shakespeare said, by any other name it would smell just as sweet. Rose means rose because everyone knows that it means rose. And kids early on, if you teach them a new word, they'll immediately use it with third and fourth and fifth parties, even though they don't have any direct evidence that other people use the word the same way. That's just built in, that words are conventions that work through common knowledge without having to think through all the layers. Likewise, laughter. Kids don't like if everyone starts laughing at them. Eye contact. A misbehaving child will avoid making eye contact with their parents, so that even if they're misbehaving, they're not misbehaving and defying their parents, which is 2 infractions rather than 1. So they must have some sense that eye contact can generate common knowledge. Namely, that you're being a bad kid and defying your parents when you make eye contact.
Stephen, this ability to think about thoughts, this is what's called recursive mentalizing?
Well, that's the jargon term, yes. So mentalizing means getting inside someone else's head, trying to figure out what they're thinking. Recursive means contains an example of itself, or taking it to the next level, where recursive mentalizing was thinking about what someone else thinks about what someone else thinks.
How did recursive mentalizing deliver us a toilet paper shortage during the pandemic?
Yes, so one of the indignities of the COVID pandemic was that toilet paper was in short supply, largely because, and it wasn't actually in short supply until people thought it was in short supply. The manufacturers of toilet paper quickly stepped up the manufacturing when people started staying home and weren't using the big jumbo rolls at schools and offices. But it was no problem to generate more bundles of Charmin. But people started to worry that other people were worrying, and so no one wanted to be left going to the supermarket or drugstore and finding the shelves bare. It's just like what happens during a bank run, where as soon as there's a rumor that the bank might be in trouble, whether or not it is in trouble, people might withdraw their savings out of fear. Here they really do engage in recursive mentalizing. They think, oh, geez, well, it seems to me the bank is okay, but what if the other guy thinks that the bank is in trouble, and he may not even think the bank is in trouble, except that he's thinking that someone else will think that the bank is in trouble. And in fact, if everyone were to withdraw their savings at once, the bank couldn't cover everyone's deposits and the bank could fail, taking the economy down with it. And that's what happened during the Great Depression. So when Franklin Roosevelt said the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, he was stating a truth about common knowledge. That was really true, that the fear caused the Great Depression, which is why these panics can sometimes be nipped in the bud by some signal that no one can act on their fear. In the case of Roosevelt, it was the bank holiday for a weekend and a couple of days. The banks no one could withdraw their money. And that meant that no one had to worry about other people withdrawing their money. In the case of the toilet paper shortage, grocers started to post signs saying limit 3 rolls per customer. And that ended the shortage not so much because people couldn't buy more than 3 rules, but people no longer had to worry about other people hoarding. And according to one story, this all began with an act of generating common knowledge, which was a comedy monologue by Johnny Carson in the era in which The Tonight Show was watched by a huge segment of the American population. There are only 3 commercial networks. Carson was the king of late night. And if he said something, you had reason to believe that a lot of other Americans were listening to him, and that they knew that a lot of Americans were listening to him. So one night in 1973, the after the Arab oil embargo, there were some shortages of meat, and Carson quipped, we've had all kinds of shortages these days, but did you hear the latest? I read it in the papers. There's a shortage of toilet paper. Now, it turned out there wasn't a shortage of toilet paper, but then there was a shortage of toilet paper when everyone who watched Johnny Carson, or knew that a lot of other people were watching Johnny Carson, worried about a toilet paper shortage, ran out to get toilet paper, creating a toilet paper shortage.
The man did not know his own power to create
He may
chaos.
not have known, indeed. Well, and some people who do know their own power, such as the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, know that financial panics, bank runs, currency attacks, recessions can happen when there is the fear of fear itself. And so they watch their words very carefully. Anything indication from the Fed that there may be a possibility of a recession can cause a recession as people put off purchases, as manufacturers cut back on manufacturing or refrain from hiring people, which is why I quote from Alan Greenspan. Since I've become a chair of the Fed, I've learned to mumble with great incoherence. If you think that I've been clear, you misunderstood what I said.
I remember people used to watch even Alan Greenspan's briefcase and whether he carried a thin briefcase or a fat briefcase into meetings to try to predict what he was going to say. Now, the chair of the Federal Reserve does have real and consequential power. How does common knowledge grant power to entities that really have only soft power and, frankly, no teeth, like the International Criminal Court?
Yeah, so sometimes there are many court systems like rabbinical courts and Sharia courts and councils that have no teeth, but that can be very effective because they generate common knowledge focal points. So, in fact, even the law of the land and the court system, there just aren't enough informants and security cameras and police officers and court time to haul everyone who breaks a law into court. The reason that the law can be effective is that everyone knows what it is. And so in certain confrontations, one person will back down and the other will get his way. Why? Well, the person who backs down because he knows the other one will stand his ground. And the guy who stands his ground because he knows the other will back down. And so on and so on and so on. How do they get to that state? Well, if there is a public rule or law, that's where they can agree who stands his ground and who backs down. It's sometimes called the expressive power of the law. And I give the example of a transition that I lived through in college, where the people used to smoke in classrooms. Professors would chain smoke through lectures, even in small seminar rooms. Students would light up next to each other in a lecture hall. It was really awful for a non-smoker like me. But I always had to be afraid in asking someone to put out their cigarette. What if they made a scene? What if they said, "I have the right to smoke. Who are you to tell me not to smoke?" As soon as universities started to post no smoking signs and made it be known that that was the policy, even though I don't think there was no smoking snitchers hotline. There were no smoking police. But when I tapped someone on the shoulder, I could point to the no smoking sign. And what it meant was, if one of us has to back down, it's the smoker.
How does common knowledge play into the esteem we give someone who has made a charitable gift, depending on whether or not they make this very publicly or very privately?
It's the way that I first became aware of the phenomenon of states of mutual knowledge and how potent they could be in human affairs. So, in charitable giving, there's a paradox that the a donor who someone who very generously gives money, if it is known that he gave money, people sort of suspect him as maybe being in it for the reputation, as having the ulterior motive. On the other hand, a lot of people probably wouldn't give unless they were incentivized by a reputation for generosity. And I learned about it in Sunday school when I learned about the great Rabbi Maimonides, Moses ben Maimon, who in 12th century Islamic Spain came up with a hierarchy, a ladder of charity, or more accurately, a ladder of righteousness, tzedakah, where the righteousness of a gift did not just depend on the size of the gift, but on the states of knowledge of the giver and the recipient. So high up on the ladder was a double-blind donation. The rich person gives money in a community chest. The poor person retrieves the money from the chest. The beneficiary doesn't know the donor, or vice versa. That was very close to the highest level. The lowest level was common knowledge. The donor puts money into the hand of the recipient. Each one knows who the other is. Then there were intermediate rungs, like the donor knows the beneficiary, but not vice versa. Like you leave some food on the doorstep of a poor person in the dead of night, scurry away. Next morning they open the door and they have the food package. The donor knows the beneficiary, but not vice versa. That's not as good as the double-blind gift in a community chest. And one rung down from that is when it's the other way around. So a wealthy person walks around with cash in a backpack. The poor person can pick it out with the assent, but not the knowledge of the donor. So the beneficiary knows the donor, but not vice versa. And even as a child, I wondered, why should that make a difference? If you're a poor person, money is money, food is food. Who cares whether the donor is known or not, or the beneficiary is known? The analysis that we came up with, me and some students researching the phenomenon, is that that we're always on the lookout for who is just intrinsically, dispositionally, in the marrow generous, who gives what they more than what they have to. We want to hang out with people like that. Those are people who might be good for us. Someone who gives and could call in the favor, could enjoy a reputation for giving, probably isn't quite as generous as someone who is willing to give anonymously. They must be truly generous if there's nothing in it for them. And I note that this paradox was explored later by another great Jewish thinker, Larry David, in an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, which works out the paradox, where Larry's character donates money for the wing of a nonprofit, which is named after him. The other wing bears an inscription donated by Anonymous, but it leaks out that the donor was his rival, Ted Danson. And everyone is gushing over what a great guy Danson is. He gave all this money and he didn't even care about the credit. Of course, he was getting the credit, but the credit wasn't common knowledge. Everyone knew, but no one knew that everyone else knew. And so he got both the reputational boost from the gift and paradoxically from the anonymity.
How does common knowledge play into plausible deniability? Like if we get pulled over and we're tempted to bribe a police officer rather than get a ticket on our driving record.
I think what happens there, and this is the phenomenon that got me interested in this common knowledge in the first place, through my interest in language, where we use euphemism and innuendo and hints and winks, and we beat around the bush, and we shilly-shally, kind of hoping that the listener will catch our drift, is that it's not so much plausible deniability. So if someone says, "Do you want to come up for Netflix and chill?" I think the plausibility isn't that deniable. I think any grown woman knows what that means. Or, gee, officer, is there some way we could settle the ticket here without doing a lot of paperwork? How plausible is the deniability? And we've done the studies, and the answer is not plausible at all. However, what is plausible is deniability of common knowledge. That is, she could think, well, maybe I know that he's just, invited me up for sex and I've said no, but does he know that I know? Maybe he thinks I'm naive. And he could think, well, does she know that I know? Maybe she thinks I'm dense. So even if there's no deniability that a sexual proposition was tendered and refused, there could be deniability of the common knowledge. And crucially, the reason that people go through this ritual is that that can preserve their relationship. They can continue on as if they were platonic friends, as if they were supervisor and supervisee, denying that each one knows that they know, allowing them to carry on the fiction of their previous relationship.
Stephen, before I let you go, is there anything we can do with what you've taught us today about common knowledge that will help us interrogate our own beliefs about the world?
Well, we can become aware of when we are deliberately keeping some fact out of common knowledge. We're relying on innuendo or hypocrisy or politeness because it preserves a relationship. And perhaps sometimes a relationship has to be changed. One person's always getting the short end of the stick, and they have to say that, perhaps rudely object to the way they're treated. On the other hand, sometimes our relationships are really valuable, and it is worth the art, the social skill, the tact of conveying something without generating common knowledge.
Stephen Pinker is the Johnstone Professor of Psychology at Harvard University. His newest book is When Everyone Knows That Everyone Knows: Common Knowledge and the Mysteries of Money, Power, and Everyday Life. Stephen, thanks so much for making time to talk.
Thanks for having me.
Think is distributed by PRX, the Public Radio Exchange. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, anywhere you get podcasts, and at think.kera.org. Again, I'm Krys Boyd. Thanks for listening. Have a great day.